Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for April 14th of 2024. For today we have an enhanced risk that spans the majority of Pennsylvania into eastern Ohio there. Risks for today do include a 5% tornado risk for western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio, with a 2% tornado risk that does extend into southern New York there. For our damaging wind risk, we do have a 30% that does extend the entirety of the enhanced risk region, and this is going to be the primary risk for that enhanced risk region and the reason why we have it. We aren't necessarily going to see the potential for some significant damaging wind gusts upwards of 50 miles per hour or higher. 60 miles per hour or higher, but we could definitely see the potential for some widespread damaging wind gusts. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 15% hail risk for western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio and northern West Virginia there, where we could see the potential for some scattered large hail. For tomorrow, we do have an enhanced risk for western Pennsylvania and northern Texas there. Risks for tomorrow do include a 5% tornado risk for the enhanced risk area, a 50% damaging wind risk for the region of concern for the Central Plains, and a 30% hail risk with the potential for some significant hail, where we could see the potential for some gorilla hail, and that's going to be the primary driver for that enhanced risk region. Some uncertainty definitely does remain in place with this system for tomorrow. We will have more information on this system tomorrow whenever I do make a video about it, but there is definitely a lot of uncertainty in place. We also do have another marginal threat for portions of the eastern seaboard for Virginia and northern North Carolina there that does include a 5% damaging wind risk and a 5% hail risk. For our day 3 outlook, we do have an enhanced risk for southern Iowa and northern Missouri there, with a pretty large slight risk that does extend across eastern Texas, northern Louisiana, the majority of Arkansas, western Tennessee, western Kentucky, western Indiana, Illinois, southern Wisconsin, majority of Iowa, eastern Nebraska, eastern Kansas, and eastern Oklahoma, with a probabilistic 30% with the hatched area where we could see the potential for significant severe weather in that region. So we are watching for the potential of some significant severe thunderstorms upcoming for our day 3 outlook. And then for day 4 to day 8 outlook, we do have a 15% for southern Indiana, western and central Kentucky, and northern Tennessee, where we could be watching for the potential for some significant severe thunderstorms upcoming. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast for today, we do have a marginal risk for southern New York, Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, and northern West Virginia into portions of Maryland there, where we could be watching for the potential of some isolated flash flooding. For our other region, we do have a marginal risk just to the north of the Los Angeles metro region, where we could be watching for the potential of some isolated flash flooding along the coastline of California there. We also do have a fairly large marginal threat for tomorrow that does span the majority of the Central Plains, from northern Texas, Oklahoma, central Kansas, eastern Nebraska, portions of Missouri, western Iowa, southern Minnesota, South Dakota, southern North Dakota, southeastern Montana, and northeastern Wyoming there, where we could be watching for the potential of some isolated flash flooding for tomorrow. Then for day 3 outlook, we do have another fairly large marginal risk that does span the majority of the Midwest, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, as well as a region into the northern Central Plains there for Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota, as well as a marginal threat that does extend down across some of the Mississippi River region down into Missouri and Arkansas. For our winter weather outlooks for today, we do have the potential for some heavy snowfall in some elevated regions of northern and western California into portions of Nevada there. For tomorrow, we are expected to see the potential for some heavy snowfall for elevated portions of Utah and Colorado, as well as elevated portions of Washington there. And then for our day 3 outlook, we are expected to see the potential of some heavy snowfall for elevated portions of Montana down into Wyoming and Colorado there. Again, this is going to be in the elevated portions of the Rockies on top of mainly mountain tops, potentially go down into some of the lower regions, but mainly going to stay in some higher elevations. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observations and how those are going to work in conjunction to support and trigger the risk for severe thunderstorms. Starting off with our upper air pattern and our 500 millibars, we are expected to see a fairly broad trough that is pretty far up to the north. The low pressure system itself is actually out of frame, probably up into Canada, but we do have a very long 500 millibar jet that is mainly zonal, pushing out of the south here, and that's going to support the risk for severe thunderstorms. We also do have a surface low that is currently located across Michigan. This surface low is expected to translate over to the New York region, and we are expected to see a warm front that is likely going to push to the north here and mainly stay around the New Hampshire, Vermont regions in New York into southern Maine, and then we are also expected to see a cold front on the back end of that is going to push down out of the south. It's going to be very very blended together. It's going to be really hard to see on our temperature models, but we are expected to see a cold front that is going to push a little bit to the north. It's going to give us a very subtle forcing, but it is going to be just enough to trigger the risk for severe thunderstorms for that region. And as far as our speed shear, we are expected to see some pretty strong 500 millibar flow with this 500 millibar jet, upwards of 70 to 80 miles per hour, anywhere ranging from 50 to 80 miles per hour, which is definitely going to be fairly supportive of speed shear. Taking a look at our 850 millibars in our low-level jet and how that's going to support the risk for tornadoes across this region and our speed shear, we are expected to see a pretty powerful low-level jet with 850 millibar flow that may be able to get upwards of mid 50 miles per hour, which is definitely going to be able to supply a very large amount of speed shear across this region and should definitely be supportive of the potential for tornadoes across this area. Taking a look at our 200 millibars for our speed shear and our defluence and how that's going to support the risk for hail and how that's going to aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Again, our trough is all the way up here, so we are likely not going to see anything as far as the spreading of our wind vectors and defluence. However, as far as our speed shear, it is also pretty limited in this field as well, because we are seeing a 200 millibar flow upwards of 50 to 60 miles per hour, which may be even weaker than our 500 millibars, which is not really going to be all that supportive of speed shear across this region. However, with how strong our 500 millibars are, we could definitely still see that compensate for the lack of strong flow aloft at our 200 millibars. Taking a look at our storm relative felicity and our directional shear and how that's going to support the risk for tornadoes across this region, something I do want to note is that anywhere from our 850 millibars and our 200 millibars, everything is going to be taking the same path out of the northwest here into the southeast. Everything is going to be taking the same zonal path, which is not really going to allow for all that much curvature in the low levels of the photograph, but we still are expected to see some pretty decent speed shear or directional shear across this region with storm relative felicity values that may be able to get upwards of 300 to 400, which are definitely going to be supportive of the potential for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that's going to support the risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent bulk shear values that are going to be definitely a little bit more on the limited side with a lack of 200 millibar flow that's going to be strong aloft. But we could still see some speed shear values backing storms that may be able to get upwards of 40 knots. But ahead of storms, it is going to be getting upwards of 30 knots. So our speed shear is definitely going to be a little bit more on the limited side as a result of the lack of strong 200 millibar flow. But our speed shear values are definitely going to be supportive of the potential for some scattered large hail across this region with some storms. Again, our hail risk is going to be a little bit more on the limited side as a result. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity and the timing for our storms across this region, our storms are expected to fire around 6 to 7 p.m. around the St. Mary's region, and then we are expected to continue to see some pretty large upscale growth at around 7 p.m. for this region. Storms are expected to move into the Pittsburgh region, as well as the State College, Williamsport, and Altoona, a region around 10 p.m. And you can also see how a lot of these storms storms do have reflexivity cores upwards of 60 dBz, indicating that we could definitely see the potential for some hail. And based on the geometry of these troughs, how our storms are positioned relative to the upper level flow, we could definitely see storms take on more of a linear like fashion. In fact, that is what the name 3-kilometer CONUS models are indicating. So we could definitely see the potential for storms to either be in a messy linear mode or potentially a little bit more of a messy isolated linear mode, but storms are going to take a default linear fashion across this region. And then as we move into the Ohio region, so we can take a look at the timing there. Again, we're still going to be focusing on that linear mode, but storms are going to again fire around 6 p.m. in Pennsylvania, and then we may see another round of storms that are going to fire around 8 p.m. for the Ohio region in eastern Ohio, or just to the south of Cleveland into to the north of Akron there, and Youngstown around 8 p.m. Storms are going to move into the Akron and Youngstown region while also continuing to initiate further off to the west around 9 p.m. Storms are expected to continue to move into the Canton, Marion, Mansfield region around 10 p.m., move into the Delaware region, and slowly begin to die off around 11 p.m. to midnight. Taking a look at our dew points and the environment and how that's going to affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty limited moisture values across this region with dew points that could potentially get upwards of 50 to maybe the low 60s. However, 60s are probably going to be associated with higher humidity due to the storms across this region. However, as far as instability and how our instability is going to be affected by our storms, we may be able to see dew points are probably going to be ranging around the mid to low 50s, which is overall going to be pretty bad for instability, and we're probably going to see some pretty limited instability as a result. Taking a look at our temperatures across this region and how that's going to affect our instability, we are expected to see some fairly warm temperatures across this region, with temperatures that could potentially be able to get upwards of the low 70s to the mid 70s. But something I do want to note is that we are also expected to see some pretty rough terrain, as the majority of this risk does go through the Appalachian Mountains. Again, our tornado risk is a little bit further off to the west here, mainly out of the way of mountains. However, if we could see the potential for tornadoes fire off further off to the east in the more mountainous terrain, the terrain will definitely be an issue as far as our tornado potential. But as far as heat goes, those higher elevations will lead to overall lower end temperatures at the surface, but we could still see some pretty warm temperatures at some lower elevations that could lead to some pretty decent instability. But with our low end moisture, we are probably not going to see anything crazy as far as instability. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that's going to affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent lapse rates, with lapse rates that may be able to get upwards of 6 to 6, 7, and potentially 8 across this region, but we could definitely see some low 8s mixed in there, and that will definitely be a pretty big aiding factor in our instability across this region, and will definitely be needed for some pretty decent instability, especially amongst our very low end moisture. So this could not only help with our instability bucket, but it could also definitely help with our hail risk as well. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperatures and our convective inhibition, how that's going to affect our instability and the potential for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of warm air advection out of the south and a pretty large cap in place before storms actually fire for the majority of this afternoon and the noon hours, and that will allow for instability to build over the next couple of hours until that cap is actually finally broken. And by the time that cap does fully break around 6 p.m. and storms can actually initiate, we are expected to see that convective inhibition return very quickly within the first couple of hours of storms actually firing. We are expected to see a cap return in place anywhere from 8 to 9 p.m., which is going to lead to more elevated storms and significantly less surface instability to likely no surface instability at all, and will be very detrimental to the risk for not only severe thunderstorms overall, but also tornadoes. But by this time, storms aren't going to be able to fire anymore, and what is currently ongoing will likely be in its dying stages. Taking a look at our instability and how that's going to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of instability before storms actually initiate. And then when storms or when this pocket of instability moves out of the region and storms actually initiate, we are expected to see much lower Cape values, with Cape values are probably going to be ranging anywhere from the mid to upper triple digits, which will definitely be able to fuel the risk for severe thunderstorms and the potential for tornadoes, large hail, and the potential for some widespread damaging wind gusts. But overall, it's not really enough to really fuel anything significant, and that's why we're not really watching for anything for a significant, because our instability is going to be a little bit more on the lower end, but still definitely going to be sufficient to fuel our various risks. Taking a look at our surface-based cape, I actually have something to say about this for once. Our surface-based cape is expected to be significantly more limited this afternoon for our storms, because storms are expected to fire off when when the sun is beginning to set, and when it becomes colder in the environment and we lose a lot of that surface heating. So we are going to lose a lot of that surface instability, and our surface instability is going to be much less compared to our most unstable cape. So the majority of our instability is expected to be aloft, but we could see cape values that may be able to get upwards of 500 to 300 at the surface, and our surface instability is expected to cut out around midnight, when storms aren't really going to be able to tap into that surface-based instability. Maybe more around 1 to 2 a.m., but around 12 a.m. is when our surface-based instability is going to be at its minimum, and not really going to be able to fuel all that much of a risk for surface-based storms. But when our surface-based cape does run out, we will still be able to see the potential for elevated severe thunderstorms, and that will still be able to support the potential for some widespread damaging wind gusts and the potential for large hail with some of these storms. But we won't necessarily see the potential for tornadoes likely past midnight. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in fueling the risk for severe thunderstorms, we aren't really expected to see any strong surface or 0 to 3 kilometer instability. We are expected to see a pocket of some pretty strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability further off to the east here. However, this is going to be where terrain is going to be significantly more bad for our storm, significantly worse. So this won't really be able to aid in all that much of a tornado risk due to our terrain. But we could definitely see that pocket of instability definitely aiding in fueling the potential for more elevated severe thunderstorms, and maybe helping with that 2% tornado risk. However, further off to the west, we aren't really expected to see all that much 0 to 3 kilometer instability. We probably won't see anything upwards of the double digits. Or anything above the double digits further off to the west in the 5% tornado risk area, which is likely not going to really aid in all that much of a risk for tornadoes across this region. And our storms will have to rely solely on our surface cape and our surface cape and our most unstable instability. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to indicate the risk for tornadoes across this region, we do have some really strong energy helicity index values that are across central Pennsylvania, further off to the east across the eastern region of that 5% tornado risk and the 2% tornado risk. However, keep in mind, we are expected to see very mountainous terrain across this region, which is going to be a very limiting factor for the potential of tornadoes across this area, and may lead to more elevated storms. So even though we do have more ingredients in place to support the overall potential for tornadoes, the overall terrain will not really be all that supportive of tornadoes across this region. Our higher energy helicity index values are probably a result of overall better instability, especially at our 0 to 3 kilometers being further off to the east. But again, our terrain is going to be a very detrimental factor, and we are expected to see some pretty decent energy helicity index values that are going to be across our 5% tornado risk, that are going to be indicating the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region. We still can't rule out the potential for an isolated, brief and weak tornado further off to the east as a result of those ingredients being in place, but it is going to be unlikely that we'll see that 5% tornado risk extend off further to the east as a result of that terrain. But again, we could still see the potential for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that's going to indicate the risk for a widespread damaging wind gusts across this region. Again, that is going to be the primary driver for our enhanced risk region for today. And with our linear mode, we could definitely see the potential for overall more of a potential for damaging wind gusts than any of our other risks for today. And we are expected to see the potential for some wind gusts that may be able to get upwards of 30 to 20, maybe reaching 40 miles per hour. However, our wind gusts are definitely going to be a little bit more on the weaker side, but they are definitely going to be very widespread, as we could see the potential for some damaging wind gusts all along the our storms are going to be across this region. So even though our risk for damaging wind gusts may be a little bit, or not our risk for damaging wind gusts per se, but the strength of our damaging wind gusts are definitely going to be a little bit more on the lower end side, we could still definitely see a much greater potential for damaging wind gusts by themselves. Taking a look at our meso-analysis page for our hail risk, I'm not really going to be able to look at our meso-analysis page for our hail risk for today because our storms are hours before firing, and because this is a short-range model and it updates in real time, we do not have anything that's indicating the actual risk for hail just yet. So I am not going to be able to look at our hail risk for on our meso-analysis page for our hail risk. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the description and updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are JaxonWX, One Nation Weather, and Weather Watcher. The links to their channels will be in the description, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.